I have the poem written by Carl Yoneda. I need to preface this to say that Carl Yoneda was born in California, in Glendale, and he traveled to Japan and China, and on his return, found himself stranded here on Angel Island. Angel Island, what a beautiful name. I would play with her until I die, but there are no angels on this land. Angel Island, what a sweet name, but there are no angels here, only nameless immigrant prisoners. Today is gone, but agony, anguish, and anxiety stay with me through the dark night until the dawn. Tears in my eyes have dried up. After several days of incarceration, no more tears of sadness, no more tears of anguish. I watch through the wired window toward evening, see the sky light up with the splendor of the setting sun as if the world explodes. America is my country, so my birth certificate says, but America doesn't want me here. I hear sounds of different voices from the next cells, Chinese, Russian, Mexican, Greek, and Italians, voices of sorrow, nostalgia, rage, and passion. On one of the sad days, I felt the closeness of my village sweetheart through a newspaper from Japan. New Year's Day on Angel Island is silent like a graveyard, and 9 Japanese deportees sitting together wrapped in blankets while I write poetry. New Year's Day came quietly and left silently. I will soon be age 21. No one can stop the sun. Gazing at the picture of Daisuke Nabe in the Japanese paper on the wall, they do not utter a single word. Suddenly, a thought flashed through my mind. Would she be at the Yokohama dock if I were to be sent back to Japan? Pain and ache have disappeared in this detention room after writing several poems for the first time in a month. Since detention here, I have forgotten the villagers who hated and some who loved me. Freedom is the only thought in my mind.
In 1923, in the summer, a group of Russians, many of whom intended to be students, were detained at the immigration station because the quota law, they had exceeded the quota assigned for Russia. That law, it dates from about 1921. And Mr. M. Moslem, we don't have his first name, published a poem in a Russian newspaper, Ruski Golos, in Harbin in Manchuria. And we haven't seen the original Russian, and here is a translation with a little bit of tinkering from me. Mr. Moslem wrote, "In a country free, humane, and honorable, where all men are brothers and where liberty flourishes, we sit behind bars and watch with anguish the sea, the mountain, and the azure ebb tide. We sit and grieve for our great steps, for the green forests where the nightingale sings. Oh, the fate of the Russian emigrant is very bitter. He sees much trouble if he leaves without precautions. He will come to Angel Island to sit behind bars and be watched, and the guard's eye to watch after him. He will curse immigration, Angel Island, and will remember the League of Nations, and will send it to the devils." Thank you.
Thanks, Eddie, and thank you, everyone. Let me start with a poem as well. While on ship, the waves filled the sky. I endured bitterness and sorrow. Upon arrival, I met with cruelty and was imprisoned in a jail. I've drifted into Yoli and recall sorrow on top of sorrow. The family at home leans on the gate and stares. Broken-hearted, they long for one far away. My hard life and my family poverty bring 2 streams of tears. If one day I can land on this shore, then I'll attain my heart's desire. This poem, and also the one that was read a few minutes ago by Supervisor Kansen Chu from San Jose, don't appear in Island, as Angel Island remains very much a work in progress. The pioneering book Island contained 135 poems, of which a few were from newspapers and oral histories. But conservatively, there are more than 200 Chinese poems on the walls at Angel Island. although some may never be deciphered, or at least not until we get better imaging technology. When you go into the barracks in a few minutes, you'll see why. There are many, many coats of lead-based paint all over the inscriptions. And that we can see much of anything at all these days is because the putty and the paint have changed over time, leaving depressions. So the process of deciphering new material is pretty painstaking and sometimes a matter of guesswork, but we hope it's not guesswork most of the time. When you do go into the barracks to look for these various inscriptions on the walls, let me just sort of point out where to look. The vast majority of the Chinese poems are on that side of the building. The two major dormitory rooms, 105 and 205, which are above each other, right up, one on top of each other here, were where the majority of Chinese immigrants were kept and where they had spent their time. So there are over 90 of the poems from Island are all in those two rooms alone. There are also poems, though, Chinese poems in virtually every other room, but usually in smaller numbers. When you get over towards this side of the room, you'll begin to see many more multinational inscriptions. There are dozens and dozens of inscriptions in Japanese in the building, and some of these are by immigrants between 1910 and 1940, although it's mostly between 1910 to 1924. But then there were also World War II detainees here, prisoners of war, but also Japanese Hawaiians who were interned here for a short time on their way to camps in the interior. Let me read. Most of the Japanese inscriptions are very prosaic. Names, places, maybe dates, which could be very useful for the historian. They didn't. The Japanese detainees didn't, as a rule, write poetry, but there were a couple of exceptions. This is a haiku that's written on the second floor by a Japanese internee who was here in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor. A lot of issei, about 2,000, I believe, issei in Japan, in Hawaii were picked up, and they were many of them were interned in Hawaii in two locations, but about 500 or 600 of them were transferred to the mainland and sent to camps in the interior. And so this is pretty clearly by the date by one of these Japanese Hawaiians. Evening, the expectation that one day will bring escape, cold, bleak. That's it. Besides Japanese inscriptions, there's also dozens of Russian inscriptions. There's Korean, there's Punjabi in Gurmukhi script. And when you look for these multinational inscriptions, you'll tend to see them more on this side of the building. The two dormitories for non-Chinese immigrants were on this side of the building, both floors. And many inscriptions there are in these various languages. The rooms in between were either used by the Immigration Service or for sitting rooms for detainees. So there will be a variety of materials there too. Besides inscriptions, there's also a lot of pictures on the walls. And as you go through the building, search for these. There's at least 40 that we found so far, and we find new ones all the time. They're birds, horses, fish. Steamships were big. There's about half a dozen of those that are carved on the walls. And there are also two altars to good luck, one on the first floor and one on the second floor, that are quite striking. So even if you don't read Chinese or these other languages, you can still look for the illustrations and get a sense of what the immigrants were feeling just from those. So thank you very much, and enjoy your visit.